Years ago, my husband and I were trying to see if we could get a modest house by contract for deed. We took my sister along to look at the house. It still had someone's personal items in it, as though they had just stepped out, but it was for sale. We walked all through and were hopeful. Suddenly, my sister said, "Wait, I know whose house this was. This house belonged to that guy my son knew who died in this kitchen. This was Tony's house." At that precise moment, a cabinet door shot open and whacked her on the backside. Never one to be rattled easily, she looked up and said, "Okay, Tony, I get it." We checked. It was indeed his house. The cabinet had been tightly shut, and the floor was stable. I've never seen a cabinet door randomly swing open with a force behind it like that. Not enough to hurt, but fast, as though a hand had whipped it open. You had to be there. My mom and dad passed, just 5 weeks apart, of unrelated cancers. We had taken my son with us to my parents' house to feed their cats. My son was 7 at the time, and he wandered downstairs to explore. At some point, he reappeared upstairs, strangely subdued. At the time, he hadn't yet learned to lie, nor did he make stuff up. My wife noticed his demeanor and asked, "What's up, kid?" He said, "Pop is outside by the fence. I want to go home now." When I was in college, I lived in an apartment complex. Every once in a while, at around 2 a.m., I would hear glass breaking. It was clear as day. I never found any broken glass anywhere around the apartment. My younger brother would come out and party with us, and once or twice he came busting into my room, thinking somebody was breaking in. Finally, one night my girlfriend stayed over. She would kick and push in her sleep, and at some point she nudged me and I woke up. When I looked over at her, she wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the foot of the bed, facing away from me. When I said her name, she stood up and walked out of the room, and then the sound of glass breaking happened. I looked around and realized that she was still laying next to me in bed. That was the only time I saw anything in that place, but heard the sounds pretty consistently. When my son was 3, he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up to see faces in the dark, and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up, and I would run into his room. It honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room, he was telling me about one of his experiences, and I saw a streak of white light move up and over his face. Another time, I ran into his room, and he was up on his knees, looking around the room. I didn't say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes, and finally he looked at me and said one word, "Manya." It was apparently his name for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time, on the baby monitor, we heard a loud male voice say, "Stop that." We happened to know a mother and daughter psychic team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside of my son's room. They tried cleansing the house remotely. They lived in another city. We thought all was good until one evening we were walking into our dining room to sit down. When my son went flying forward into the table, he started crying and said that someone pushed him from behind. We kept our son in our room that night, and my wife and I both heard what sounded like an old man making gagging noises from my other son's room. He was 11 months old. Our friends put together a whole team and they came and cleansed the house. It was quite a process, and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos, but they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. I was babysitting my niece when she was 2 years old. My sister was renting a very old house that was built in the 1930s. I'm alone in the place with her while my sister is working overnight. It's about 11 p.m. and she's been asleep for a couple hours at this point. I'm watching TV in the living room and see her running down the dark hallway. She stops just before the entryway to the living room, and I jokingly say, "You better get back to bed or I'm gonna get you." I got up to get her back in bed, turned the hallway light on, and I found that her bedroom door was still closed. I opened it to find my niece completely passed out in her bed, drooling and everything. It wasn't my niece I saw in the hallway, so I took her to sleep with me that night. At the time when this happened, about 8 years ago, when I didn't believe in ghosts as much, my family and I were staying at a historic hotel in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I had a few spare moments and decided to explore the hotel because it was absolutely beautiful. I got lost and I happened to run into someone who looked like they worked for the hotel but weren't a house cleaner or a clerk, so I was unsure of their position or job. I asked for directions back to the lobby since I had to meet my family in a few minutes. The moment I arrived in the lobby and walked past the front desk, a clerk and a security guard were staring at me in shock with pale faces. The security guard asked me who I was talking with earlier for the directions back to the lobby. I told him I thought it was someone who worked at the hotel. Well, wouldn't you know it, it turns out that floor I was on has a bunch of paranormal crap that goes on regularly. The person I was talking with never appeared on the security feed, even though they should have been in plain view. It was super creepy because I had shaken this person's hand for some reason, and the footage just showed me shaking hands with the air. The person appeared in front of me as any other person would have. When I touched their hand, it felt like any squishy person would normally, and yet they never showed up on the footage. There was no way I could have blocked out the person from view of the camera either, as I'm only 5'6". The security guard even pulled up a second angle for further proof. No one else believes me despite the footage. To this day, I still don't know how to explain it. I was in my room, writing in my journal before bed. It was a bit later, and my parents were asleep. Most lights in the house were off, except a little desk lamp. All of a sudden, this figure stood in front of me, and I couldn't breathe. It only lasted maybe 5 seconds, but as soon as I could move, I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. When I did, I heard footsteps immediately leave my room, and the door gently closed behind. I stayed in that bathroom for an hour at least. It still scares me to this day. When I was younger, I lived in a small house that was really dark and quiet at night. I always woke up around midnight most nights and would look for something to eat in the kitchen. So one night, as per usual, I woke up and went to grab the first slice of bread from the new bread my mom bought that day. The kitchen is completely dark, besides the 2 small windows that were fogged so no one could look in. There was this small corner around my fridge that was just dark, like darker than the rest of the kitchen, even when there was light hitting it. However, I was partially asleep, so I didn't think much of it. So, when I went to grab the slice of bread, something hit me in the face. I went to wipe it off my face, and all I felt were just these long fingers. I was terrified and ran back to my room, and as I ran, I could hear and feel something chasing me, and I could hear all kinds of things falling behind me as I ran back to my room, frightened. When I got to my room, I shut my door and felt my eye, and it was bleeding. To this day, I have a scar. Never have I encountered something that terrifying again. The earliest memory I have is of an experience with an apparition. Based on what I know, I was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. My parents didn't believe me and always had some explanation for me. We moved houses, and tiny things would happen here and there, but once again, my parents always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Fast forward to getting married, moving into an old apartment, and things started to heat up a little bit. Things would get flipped over, and the contents dumped on the floor. Then we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband said he would hear me calling him from another room, but I wouldn't be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me all the way around the corner into the far room, only to dead end with the room empty. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights, and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, absolutely losing it. I can't get her to calm down. Usually a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her off this time. I finally go to my room to take a breather, and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later, she's at it again. I go halfway up the stairs and am talking to her through the banister, finally getting her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs, then a huge slam on the baby gate there happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it because I've heard that that's the best thing to do when something's right next to you. The dog barks, but I get her stopped again. Then right in my line of sight, I see a pen slid forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack and goes into another fit, looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it and immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sit on my bed next to my cat, napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later, my cat turns to look at the doorway. His back raises up, ears pinned back, and his hair stands on end, looking straight at the doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. My childhood home was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 3. It started slow, with him and I seeing weird things at night and constant nightmares. Things would go missing, only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps, and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years, though, it started to escalate. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running and the door to their walk-in closet creaked shut. She assumed it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the floor were swaying. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. Another story. I was home alone, waiting for my boyfriend to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out of my bedroom and headed toward the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing that almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It cracked its neck to look up at me, and I ran. I called my boyfriend, and he wasn't there yet. I hid in my room until he came. This happened when I was 11, visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside. Considering we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day, no one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick tour. As I played outside, a really beat up ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up, I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him, and he wandered away. I didn't think anything about it, but when my parents were done with the tour, they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of, I was just wandering around. Oh, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid, he looked startled, because as I mentioned earlier, there was no one other than us at the lighthouse. Only 3 cars, my parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at a picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliche, but when he showed me the picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat up ball. Apparently that kid died at the lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy. So, you might be asking me, why was this creepy? Especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me. What creeps me out is that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost, not other objects. Assuming that was a ghost with his ball, what the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid, like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This still bothers me to this day. I'm from Indonesia, where paranormal activities are quite normal here, but then I had this one disturbing experience. One day I went to my uncle's home in Geneva. He loves collecting statues or historical stuff. Then I was asked to take out the trash that day, and I went to the basement where his office room is at. It's a small room, like 2 by 3 meters. Then somehow I saw a statue of a goddess with 4 or 6 arms, and the aura in that room just suddenly went cold. There were 4 rooms in the basement, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, an office room, and a storage room. Somehow after I grabbed all of the trash, I couldn't find the stairs to go back. It's gone, literally gone. I was quite panicked, and then I smelled some strange scent, like an ancient flower. I went into the office room, and I spoke to the statue. Hey, I am sorry if I disturbed you in a way I cannot imagine. I need to go back upstairs, okay? Just let me go. Then, after that, I can see the stairs again, but after that, it took me years to be able to go to any basements. My newlywed husband and I moved into our first home. It was really old and run down. It had good bones, but had sat empty for a number of years. We learned after moving in that the previous owner, an elderly lady named Mary, had been moved into an old folks' home due to dementia and then recently died. Someone had left her funeral pamphlet in our letterbox, and her funeral was at the church next to our house. We understood that she had lived there her whole life and never married or had children. The house was opposite a small water hole. The activity started off mild when we moved in. We could hear footsteps like someone running on timber floorboards at all hours of the night. At first, we just laughed it off. Within 2 weeks, we were joking about our ghost, and my mother bought me sage to cleanse the house. She put it on my bed, but it disappeared. It reappeared later in a cupboard in an unused room in the house. With it was a very old photograph of a little girl in a broad hat in front of our house. It was creepy, but we were unfazed. We are atheists and didn't bother with the sage. One night, the footsteps intensified. We could hear it outside our bedroom door, which was open. I looked up to see an apparition of what looked like a boy who was in swimming trunks. I screamed, I was so terrified. The next day, we cleansed the house with a sage, and the activity stopped. I did some research later and found a news story of a boy who drowned in the water hole opposite the house, who was the same age as Mary. Maybe they were friends. Everything was normal again until we renovated the house. The footsteps were back and the activity intensified. Objects would slide off tabletops and crash into the wall. Small pieces of furniture would be knocked over before our eyes. My baby would scream at something we couldn't see. We found that talking about it or acknowledging it made it worse. We decided to make contact with it. This was a very bad idea. I looked up some YouTube videos. I won't go into what I did, but I blacked out, middle of the day, broad daylight, and was sent to a hellish void. I could hear screaming and growling and could smell smoke. It was like a near-death experience, but instead of bright light, I saw hell. I know that sounds insane, and I thought so too. I went to the hospital to be assessed, thinking that I must be crazy, or had a seizure, or a brain tumor or something. Anything to explain what had happened. I am in fact 100% healthy and sane. Everything stopped. We did not talk about it, for fear it would come back, and a year later, we moved away. My youngest child knew nothing about what had happened, and had just begun to talk. As we pulled into our new house, she cried and begged for us to never return to the old house again. She said it scared her. Nothing weird or creepy has happened to us since, and I have never gone back to our old house. We still own it though.